professor with the University of Tennessee and a member of the Building Strong Brains Tennessee Lunch and Learn Content Planning Committee. We welcome each of you to the Building Strong Brains Tennessee Lunch and Learn series. Since its inception, Building Strong Brains Tennessee has connected brain science and communication science to change the culture in Tennessee to be informed by ACEs, trauma, and resilience. This culture change has prompted many professionals, communities, and philanthropists to use the latest brain science to better prevent and mitigate ACEs, trauma, and toxic stress. 4 years of comprehensive, coordinated, and collective work from both the private and public sectors have positioned Tennessee as a national leader in ACEs response. With your leadership and collaboration, we hope this Lunch and Learn series will propel and expand cutting-edge work as we support professionals and community members to learn from innovative efforts happening at the national and local levels. We remind everyone that you are on mute and will be unable to unmute yourself. Please post questions in the chat box for the presenters' responses at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth YouTube page. Finally, please fill out the survey that pops up at the end of the webinar and let us know if you would be interested in joining a learning community addressing today's topic area. We also thank the Tennessee chapter of the National Association of Social Workers for providing CEUs for this event. We will email attendees of the live webinar a certificate of attendance following the presentation. We thank Building Strong Brains Tennessee for sponsoring the event. If you are interested in receiving notice of future Building Strong Brains Lunch and Learn opportunities, please email Jennifer Drake-Croft at jen.croft, that's jen.croft @tennessee.gov or tn.gov. Now we'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker, Dr. Patricia Dyke. It's my pleasure to welcome her today. Dr. Dyke has a passion for developing people and equipping individuals and organizations to identify and overcome obstacles to achieving their potential. Prior to returning to graduate school, she was a paralegal for 10 years, specializing in family and criminal law, working closely with response teams addressing child welfare cases. Desiring to better understand prevention and early intervention strategies, she earned a PhD in family and human development with an emphasis on adolescent development. For the past 30 years, Dr. Dyke has continued as a rural social scientist at the University of Kentucky, focusing on the social, health, and economic well-being of low-income rural families and children in their community context. Since 1998, she has played a key role in the Rural Families Speak multi-state research project with 18 land-grant universities examining the impact of welfare reform and the Affordable Care Act. Through interviews, low-income rural mothers have shared insights into economic strategies and health challenges, shedding light on their resilience in changing policy and community contexts. 2 other projects have been particularly impactful. In the 1990s, Dr. Dyke received 5 years of grant funding from the Kentucky Department of Health and Human Services to develop community collaboration for children. This Title IV-B project identified and implemented new statewide strategies to address needs of children in foster and kinship care and support efforts towards reunification. More recently, through the Southern Rural Development Center's Turning the Tide on Poverty Civic Engagement Project, leadership capacity of residents from underrepresented groups was fostered to develop sustainable programming addressing community needs. She's also internationally recognized for her research on developing civic engagement in the U.S. In 2014, Dr. Dyke was selected for one of the most prestigious appointments in the Fulbright Scholar Program. She served as a Fulbright Masaryk University Distinguished Chair in Social Studies in the Czech Republic. For 6 months, she lived in Brno, taught courses in family sociology and community sociology, and mentored community organizations newly emerging post-communism. As a professor in the Department of Community and Leadership Development in the College of Architecture, Food, and Environment, Dr. Dyke serves as the Director of Graduate Studies and teaches graduate seminars in research design, individual and group dynamics, and advanced leadership theory and dynamics. At the undergraduate level, she teaches strategies for effective community assistance. It is my deep pleasure and joy to welcome Dr. Patricia Dyke to our Lunch and Learn series.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, great. That was very important. Thank you, first of all, to all of you who are very engaged in this initiative, building strong brains. Those that I've been working with, Jen Cross and Mary Rolando, and with Dr. Wallace. Very encouraging to see the great work that is being done here in Tennessee. Today, it is a privilege for me to share with you what I hope will be useful information as you consider your role in addressing adverse childhood experiences. It's likely that you are familiar with the topics that I'll be touching on, but I hope each of you will leave with some insights on how to apply what you hear to your specific context and your spheres of influence. As Dr. Wallace indicated, I am a professor at the University of Kentucky. Normally, I spend about 2/3 of my time in Kentucky, and the other third of the time I spend here in Tennessee. My husband and I purchased our eventual retirement home near our son's family in Spring Hill in Williamson County. We wanted to spend time with our 7th and 9th grade granddaughters. But for the past 60 days, we have been sheltering in place here in Tennessee, celebrated a drive-by 13 in quarantine birthday party, and physically distancing from our loved ones. You may have noticed that I said physically distancing, which I'm supporting wholeheartedly. But I'm not a fan of the term social distancing. It implies that we should not be in touch with our friends, coworkers, neighbors, or strangers that need our support and encouragement. Social connection is crucial to resilience. Along with you, I look forward to the day when we can again safely stand and hold hands without looking at this picture and saying, you are not 6 feet apart. Interestingly, I searched all over the internet to try to find pictures of social support but every one of them had people close together. So social connection is really important. I've listed on the slide there some of the terms in my title that I will be addressing in this talk that I think will be of interest to you. I hope that you have a pen and paper or a phone where you can record some thoughts during this presentation, because I'm going to have a couple of times of reflection that I want you to kind of use as your own next steps as we finish up this lunch and learn. So let's just take a couple minutes to reflect. I think I'm probably right when I say that for most of us, the word that we would use to describe our morning was probably not peaceful. So I chose a very peaceful picture for us to be reflecting on as we think a few moments about where we are right now. I want you to think about, how have your morning routines been impacted by the pandemic? Do you have time for a quiet cup of coffee or tea? Is there time or personal space for reflection, meditation, yoga, prayer? Has your household composition changed? Have additional family members come under your care? There might not be additional people in your home, but you're probably spending much more time with the same people. Or if you're living alone, how do you stay connected to family, friends, and neighbors? Now reflect on how your roles have changed, say, since February. Do you long for that old challenge of work-life balance when at least those two spheres were physically separated? Or Are you anxiously waiting for the economy to open up again so you even have a job to balance? Are you exhausted from competing for use of the computer with your children's schoolwork? Or are you desperately seeking hotspots so you can connect to Wi-Fi? Now think about the community where you live. In what ways have friends, neighbors, strangers come together to support one another? Do you consider yourself vulnerable? Or is that a label that has been imposed upon you? If you are not vulnerable, how are you supporting those who are? So during this pandemic, we have become keenly aware of our need to be connected and supported by our friends and family. We have been sensitized to the needs of our most vulnerable community members and the plight of families facing economic uncertainty, homeschooling, and emotional tensions. Some communities under this crisis with greater community capacity. They have been able to mobilize residents, nonprofits, the faith community, government institutions, and for-profits to secure and invest in local and extra-local resources to address the needs and to create some growth opportunities. These resilient communities have greater capacity to recover, integrate this crisis, and accommodate a new normal. So let's examine some factors here. Okay, let's start with the first word in my title, incubating. I'm curious how many of you were a bit perplexed with this word. So what comes to mind when you hear the word incubating, incubate, incubation? My family and friends suggested the following here. Cute chicken. Okay, first we think about incubating chickens. All right, another one is a business incubator or incubating ideas for the seed taking growth. And then there is this other invader that is growing and developing, because incubation is also that time between being exposed to an infection and growing and showing the symptoms. But what do all of these have in common? Nurturing environments that foster growth and development. So let's look at these factors here. Resilience. I love this picture here. Simply put, resilience is the ability to overcome difficulty. If the difficulty is too extreme to overcome, a sense of fear and lack of safety arise, and there is a stronger potential to become traumatized. Now, I screenshot this off of PSA on the Building Strong Brains website. So if you want to go and watch the PSA, you can see the full information there. But we need to realize too that there is stress that is normal, positive stress, tolerable stress, and then it's this toxic stress that really creates the trauma in us. And we're looking for resilience. What is it? That we find it in our neighborhoods and playgrounds and relationships that are safe, our faith community, friendships, stability, mentors, and then particularly now thinking about our medical support. Now, there's a lot on this screen, but I want to walk you through this right now because this is a lot of important information is embedded in this. As a social scientist, I use this social ecological model quite a bit to understand the various contexts that individuals are embedded. If we look to the left of this model, we see the little yellow circle representing an individual. So what are the characteristics of an individual that impact growth and development? We see that individuals are embedded in networks of family and friends. Then expanding out from that, we see that there is a sphere of organizational level of this model where it includes school, faith communities, other community organizations. And then we go even farther out into the broader community, the natural environment, the built environment, and yet the farthest out there would be the cultural level, policies, laws, other impacts. I think it's also important for us to see that imposed on the earth, that it is a global context that we are operating in. And I think this has all become very, very apparent to us that we are impacted on a daily basis by decisions that are being made and actions that are being taken around the world. So if we think of this pandemic even impacting our lives, you know, we're daily, if we want to, we're learning of the challenges that Italy, Russia, the United Kingdom are facing, and as it moves into our own decision making at the national level, we're hearing different models being shared with about health, about economics. And then in our own communities, we're figuring out what does that look like for opening up again. And again, for the schools and faith community, is it safe for us to come together again? And in that closer social network level there, our friends, our families, how are we being creative of staying connected to them? And how do we look out for the individual members in our families to continue to grow and develop and thrive and develop that sense of resilience? So this model is important for us to be thinking about is, you know, what is our touch points in addressing the challenges that children and families in particular face? Okay, I'm in the Department of Community and Leadership Development. I am engaged in community development. We think of communities, there's three main types of communities that many of us are probably associated with some of each. Usually when we think of community, we think of a place. We think of, and it's probably when you were thinking earlier about your community, you were probably thinking about the town, the neighborhood, the county in which you reside. Place, we do think of that, and change begins at that local level, you know, that reaching out, touching, supporting, working with people. Another community is a community of practice, our work, our profession. I had to give the shout out to our healthcare community of practice on how they are almost becoming bonded in battle in this, in developing that close community and of caring for all of us. And then there's the community of interest. You've all been attracted somehow to this particular Lunch and Learn because you're interested in that topic of how do we address adverse childhood experiences. So we're involved and engaged in each of these communities. So again, think about what is that sphere of influence for you, and how are you working in that area? So when we think about community capacity here, we're thinking about the collaboration of people using resources within a community to develop strategies to address stressors and promote and develop the well-being of our community members. So we want to be listening to diverse community members and organizations to see how do we garner those resources, how do we maximize them to move our efforts forward. Now, again, as a rural social scientist, I work in the world of frameworks. Now, this is the Community Capitals Framework developed by my colleagues at the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. And this framework, we use it in research, but it's also been very practical in our applied work, in community programming, in in analyzing effectiveness of programming. So I wanted to bring this to you and talk about this so you can be thinking about the ways in which the work you're doing is intersecting with these different capitals. So when we think of capital, most of us probably go to the top center circle there. Financial capital. We're thinking about income, wealth, the banking institutions, the resources that are available in a particular community. Let's go around this circle. Excuse me. Go around this, the model counterclockwise. So if we go to the natural capital, we're looking at that, the air, the water quality, the landscape, how is space able to be used? In our rural areas, this is a rich resource for many communities. The opportunity to be outdoors, to bike, to hike in those settings that also adds to the health and well-being of community members. Continuing to the next one, to the cultural capital. If we think about what is the kind of diversity we have in our area, what are the traditions, what are the what ways does it make our area particularly unique? A lot of my work has been done in Appalachia, particularly Central Appalachia, and we think about the connectedness, the kinship ties, the tie to the land, the bluegrass music, all those that contribute to the rich culture of that area. Moving around, human capital, this is another one that's probably often thought of by people, and it has to do with the education level, the skills, the health, the resource, the people that are available for jobs in that area. Next, with social capital. Again, I talked about social support at the beginning. This is really important. What is that connects people together? How do people just hang with just their really close friends, or do they have friends from diverse groups? Is the leadership in the community looking to give voice to people, which blends into this political capital about a democratic approach in our communities. Does everyone have a voice? Are people listened to? Is power distributed throughout the community, or is it tightly held in a few families? This impacts the capital that can be marshaled for use. And then the final one, the built capital. That would be our infrastructure, our water systems, our utilities, our healthcare systems, our broadband, all of those that provide that a broader infrastructure. So as we look at these capitals, our communities are rich with them. Although some are more wealthy in one of these capitals than others, but the blend of these coming together impact the outcomes of the healthy environment, the economy, and the social equity and well-being of our communities. So keeping those capitals in a framework in mind, I think, is very helpful. Another approach that I'm a big advocate of and believe very strongly in is listening, listening to people, listening to the stories of people, listening to their expertise. A lot of my work has been in sitting in the homes and the trailers in of low-income rural families, and just gaining so much just learning from their wisdom on how to make ends meet with what appears to be low resources. But that listening, what are the assets that our communities have in place? So a process that is very prevalent in community development is asset mapping, and many of you have probably participated in some variation of this. It's basically what is already there, what is already working, what is available. Oftentimes, those of us with specializations and expertise see from our perspective what needs to be done. And we have great resources that we bring to that, but we want to make sure that we're bringing the appropriate resources, that we're bringing, and we're not just looking at things from on top, but we're providing resources and expertise on tap. How do we come alongside? So if we look at the assets in a community, we see what are the gifts of the people that live there. old elders, youngers, what are the skills, the talents that already exist in a particular community? What associations, groups, networks are already in place? How are people connected through social media? How are people coming together and gathering when we used to be able to do that in physical presence? But then what are those local institutions? And we've seen so many of our local institutions adapting to this digital age, but what is there? And the heartwarming stories of communities saying, we just don't have the resources here. Can someone come alongside, and having wonderful stories of how that has been occurring. So thinking about this, thinking about what are those capitals, those assets, and then going in and listening and finding out what is there to work with. And that is so important in our process of building resilience. So that community resilience is that ability to strategically maximize their capitals, their assets, to address a crisis or the ongoing needs of their residents. So yes, rural is in my title, and as a rural social scientist, I think it's really important that we understand some of the implications of naming places or defining places or categorizing places. And if we want to nurture communities, we have to really be aware of how do we provide the resources that may be necessary. And for those of you who are on the policy or the, some of you may be involved in state or federal government that are listening to this, but you know the challenge of allocating scarce resources involves many tough decisions. You're often looking for how do you get the biggest bang for your buck? Now, that means that most policies are geared towards high density areas, so the more urban areas, because that's where you get more bang for your buck. There's more of a concentration of services, and you can show changes in your metrics much easier than when people are at far distances. So public policy is never a one-size-fits-all proposition. State and federal agencies that work with local governments need to understand the different challenges that those local officials face and tailor their programs to fit the conditions that differ across the jurisdictions. So keeping in mind that programs and policies that work in an urban center may be irrelevant or maybe even counterproductive in rural areas. So we want to keep this in mind as we think about this. Now, when we start to measure or define or label rural and urban areas, there's a number of definitions. I've put this graphic up here because you have available an excellent report here in Tennessee. Now, again, this presentation is somewhat, at least this part is going to be Tennessee-centric. But I'll share a few graphics from Tennessee to demonstrate how place and definition is important as we think about the dissemination of programming. So one of the first ones that this report highlighted was a measure that came out of the work of Dr. Bridget Waldorf at Purdue with an index of relative rurality. And I will tell you, those of you who may be joining us from different states, if you go back to that report, you'll see where they generated the data and the information, and you can then go out and find it for yourself for your states as well. But what I like about this graphic is it is a continuum here and not categorical. Look to on the left side of the graphic is the greenest, the most rural, and as you move to the right of that spectrum, the more reddish is the most urban. So in looking at Tennessee's 95 counties, you can see that the most densely populated county is Shelby County, and the lightest green counties are kind of scattered between those more urban centers. Okay, so keeping in mind what this map looks like, and I just want to point out to you, because I'll share a different categorization in a moment, is here's Hickman County right here and Trousdale County right there. Okay, here's another way we carve up rural and urban. This is the metropolitan and micropolitan statistical area. Sometimes it's MSSAs. You see this, and this is developed by the U.S. Census Bureau and the Office of Management and Budget. And you can see the red clusters in this diagram are identifying urban centers. And then you see kind of boundaries around the outside of that. And those are the counties that are considered within those areas. So if we go here to the Nashville area, it's Nashville, Davidson, Murfreesboro, Franklin, Tennessee. So basically middle Tennessee here, okay? And that is defined by the urban core and commuting distance. So these outlying counties here are within this commuting area. Now, Davidson County is only 4% rural, whereas some of these outlying counties are 40 people per square mile, so much, much more rural, but they are lumped in together in this measure. So if someone is disseminating resources to rural areas, these counties that are normally considered more rural are not going to be able to qualify for certain funding opportunities. Another way to look at it is the U.S. Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service uses the rural-urban continuum codes. And so here, again, you see the same color coding of darker red for urban and green, darker green for rural. And again, we see that some of our most rural counties are categorized here within these urban cores. In fact, Hickman County here, that is one of the most rural counties by population density and other measures, is showing up here even more rural than those in the Knoxville area. So you can, those of you who are joining us from Tennessee can see where your county is, and you can say, where I'm sitting here, this is not this is not a city. This is not a densely populated area, but you are being categorized as that. So it really is important for us to be thinking about as we're making policy decisions, as we're disseminating resources based on these different categorizations, that this may be impacting our resource distribution and our ability to serve people well. And so keep those in mind as we move forward. I'll share with you one more Tennessee-centric map of the counties here. That this data, again, is available from the Tennessee website or from Kids Count website. They have been for several decades doing county analysis of child well-being. And what we see here is in this map, the lighter the color, the higher the ranking. So the lightest colored counties are in the lighter blue, and the lowest ranked counties are in the darker purple. Now, these indicators are based on health of the children in the area, the economic well-being, the school achievement, attainment, and other community variables. So you can go to this and you can pull down the data for your county, and these maps are available for the entire nation. so you can pull this down for your area. I just wanted to point out again, remember this urban area here around the Nashville area here. Two of the counties within this, here's Williamson County where I live, right down here at the border of Murray County. Williamson County is ranked #1 as the healthiest county for children in Tennessee. Contrast that to the neighbor to the north, Davidson County, is actually ranked 95th. So we may have maybe a 25-mile difference from maybe 30 from the top of one county to another, and yet we have dramatically different life opportunity structures for the children in our various counties. So keeping that in mind, it's important for us to look within the counties as well. So enough of the statistics and maps. Let's look at our vision, these healthy kids running along. But most of the research that talks about rural and vulnerable rural children is looking at it on the lens of health and well-being disparities. So the factors that are associated with rural risk for children have to do with the geographic isolation, lower socioeconomic status, higher rates of health risk behaviors, limited access to health care, limited job opportunities, and being a member of a minority group. So risk. Okay. Now, thinking about risk, we need to think about the circumstances, characteristics, conditions, events, or traits at the individual, family, community, or cultural level. Remember that graphic that I had for you, those embedded circles. Okay, we're going to look at what are the circumstances, the characteristics, the conditions at each of those levels that impact the likelihood that they will experience adversity. Common but not determining factors are living in poverty, lack of social supports, prior history of trauma, self-identifies as a LGBTQ individual, children in military families. Now, we're not going to go deep into every one of these right now, but I want you to think about, you know, what are those characteristics in the particular communities that you're working in that are going to increase the likelihood of adverse conditions. Okay, adverse childhood experiences. Again, I've pulled down this graphic from the Child Trends website. They're listed in a number of different places. These are ACEs that you may see in the literature. Many of you are are all too familiarly acquainted with these childhood experiences. And so if you take a look at these, they basically have to do with the living situation of a child. Who are the adults, the parents? What are the life events that have occurred in the life of their parents, whether they have their birth parents are living with them, or they are serving time in prison, mental illness, or problems with drug and alcohol. And then what are the social interactions that occur within the home? Have the children witnessed events, or have they been victimized themselves? And, you know, have they experienced economic hardship? Now, an additional item that is often added to this relates to if you are a member of a minority group across any of the different classifications of that. What I want you to do for a moment here is to stop and think about these ACEs. Those of you who work directly with families are putting names and faces to these challenges, even as you are thinking about these. And I want us to think about, too, this time and place here that families have been sheltering in place. which of these conditions do you expect are escalating in the lives of our Tennessee families? To me, the one that pops out first is number 8 there. With the high unemployment rate, families possibly are furloughed, but they don't know whether they're going to go back at work. If you're in the service industry, certainly you've been impacted by this. If you're employed in a meat processing plant, especially those hot spots right on the I-24 corridor, you are experiencing these economic hardships very viscerally. And we hear these stories. I think another one that we'll see increases in, or that we'll have to be continuing to deal with, is number 5. I like to, not like, but I see this as an increase in numbing behaviors. How do you numb the pain? How do you take your mind off of? How do you de-stress? And unfortunately, a lot of people turn to alcohol or drugs. Talking about, I heard a piece the other day on families that were having virtual happy hours and thus increasing their alcohol consumption. And they're doing that in the home with the children around them. And so I think we're going to see the need to help people move away from those numbing behaviors. The last one that I think probably most of us to some extent have experienced or caught ourselves with is number 6 there, where when we're in close proximity, when stress is increasing, we often say things that we would like to take back. In the heat of the moment, we say things, and hopefully you're able to mend that and to ask forgiveness of those that you have verbally lashed out on, and when it wasn't really them, but it was the tension that you're feeling, that you're dealing with. But people are probably slamming more doors, and sadly probably more physical acting out of that inner turmoil that's going on. So I think these are at least 3 of these adverse childhood experiences that I think we have to anticipate. How do we now address as we come out of this area? And those in rural areas may not have access to as many key people or resources to turn to. So thinking about that as we move forward. So again, from Child Trends website helps us to remember to realize this widespread impact of this, in our case now, the virus, and recognizing signs and symptoms in the families, our own families, as well as those we work with, and looking about what do we know, how do we come alongside, how do we, what are best practices that we need to infuse into the system, and how do we going forward, how do we create those environments where we don't have the re-traumatization. We talked about risk factors. Now let's look on the more positive side here of what are these protective factors that are present in all of our communities. Again, starting in the upper left here with social and emotional competence, the thumbs up here. As I mentioned before, having that positive relationship with a caring adult in their life. Those are protective factors. Social connections. That social support, again, is so important. How do we maintain those social connections? Concrete support. Think of this as actual food banks providing food. Pre-February, we had the opportunity to have others care for our children, mom's days out, schools, childcare, that gave us space to not have to deal with everything 24/7, and it also enhanced the connection to other caring adults in our families' lives. Resilience. I don't know if you noticed that little green icon there. That's a slinky. Thinking of a slinky going back and forth, that resilient nature that we have, that we respond and we go back, we regroup, we respond. It's that ability to go back and forth in our everyday situations. And then for me, I think that one of the key important factors here is that our children thrive when parents are providing not only affection, but also know how to talk and listen and have routines, as we've been hearing so much of lately, and provide opportunities that promote appropriate growth and development. Again, this is that growing, nurturing environment. How do we incubate this in our families and in communities? Because we know that the strongest protective factor is linked with resilience to is that sensitive, caring adult in the lives that provides safety and caring and nurturing. So again, a shout out to Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina for this wonderful chart in laying out these 5 protective factors. Now, another aspect that I think is really important to look at here is as we're going in and working with and addressing the challenges, we need to be assessing whether the families and the children we are serving are in need of relief, which would be that immediate Band-Aid. Is it rehabilitation? They just need some resources, that safety net kicking in to bring them back to what would be close to a pre-crisis level. And then, or third, is it we're coming alongside because they're doing pretty well with things, but they need some additional resources to continue to develop that resilience and thrive. And amidst of all of this, those of you who are service providers are having to adjust to new client needs. And to keep in mind, families that were doing very well pre-COVID-19 may be needing more support at this time due to the job instability or loss or illness or other challenges that they may be facing. And hopefully you are brainstorming with your colleagues and other providers to address topics that may not normally be part of your client load, in the sense of having conversations with people about how to get groceries delivered or how to support sick family members when so much more healthcare is coming into our homes. And also, we need to also be thinking for that third branch, or that development side. How are we going to strategize to support our clients' needs after this crisis and going back to a new normal? What does it look like as we restore things back to more connection to people in that way? And then again, going back to my community capitals and the assets pieces there, how are you collaborating within and across agencies for community resiliency? Be sure that you clarify what are the roles within your agency and what are gaps in your services, and how can you partner with the gaps in other programs? What new referral networks need to be established? And checking in, making sure that you're not duplicating efforts so that you can maximize that ability for coverage in your community. And just knowing that things are shifting so quickly. We have learned new technologies, we have learned new skills that we didn't know we needed to know even over the last few months. So thinking about this in the process. So I like this visual here. Again, this is from Prevention Lane. It's an organization that addresses substance abuse. Again, I've added the link to there. This is a poster that they have made publicly available for people to have as a reminder or to post in their offices. So that the left side of this tree is that that bleak side of trauma that's rooted in family histories of either abuse or poverty or loss or neglect or violence, that the branches are fairly barren there. There's a lot of pain and fear and anger and stress. And what I'm sure all of us are concerned about and dedicated to is helping these families and communities move from that bleak left side to that beautiful, thriving picture of growth and fulfillment and recovery that's rooted and grounded in support groups and knowledge and social connections and access to the kinds of services that are needed to grow that kind of fulfillment and resilience that we need in those communities. So thinking about how do we focus on that aspect there. I just would love to see that both sides of that tree look like that. So as we come together as a community around our most vulnerable children, I think we have this goal, and my goal would be that we have generations of resilient Tennesseans, that we are creating a vision of resilient communities that gives hope for the future, and that hope feeds resilience. So I just want to offer my gratefulness, my thanks to all of you who are working wherever you are in that ecological model, from the family level clear through the state and national level. You're doing your part to create this hope and this resilience in our communities. So thank you very much.
Dr. Dyke, that was amazing. Thank you again. We had so many comments about how wonderful this presentation was. We've already had one question come in, which I'll read aloud, and I'm reading these aloud for the benefit of both Dr. Dyke, who can't see the chat, but also for those who are going to be watching this recorded webinar. The first thing I want to say is I've gotten several questions about will these slides be available. I want to let you all know that Dr. Dyke has graciously made her slides available, and I will be emailing them to all participants and everyone who registered, along with a link to the recorded version of this webinar by close of business tomorrow. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. They're easier to access that way than through the Q&A box. And the very first question that we got is there research on how communities use local, county, state, and federal data like these slides to determine resource distribution? Does it vary by region or state social economic status?
The answer is yes to all of those. I would say that a lot of grant funding, a lot of nonprofit local organizations are turning to the data from Kids Count, from other resources as they're putting together grant proposals going forward. I would say that you've got several excellent resources here. Also, I would reach out to Cooperative Extension Service. They have access to a lot of resources as well. I know I work very closely with cooperative extension agents in all 120 of our counties in Kentucky as we're putting things together. And they're usually at a state level. There are reports that are disseminated about who is receiving grants in different areas, and I think I've seen a number of nonprofits, kind of pulling together and looking as a region, how do we move things forward and move the needle on that. So I would say there are, depending on what state you are in, there are different kind of avenues for that, but there are a lot of national resources. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has county level data as well that you can use to look at in defining what you've got. And then usually you would turn to some of your local government and state government to identify what are some of the funding streams and how are resources coming through. Also through your state legislature, oftentimes there are initiatives and appropriations that are made that you can be in connection with to get a sense of what resources are becoming available that we can target. I hope that touched a little bit on that answer. There's a lot of data resources out there that often go untapped. Not necessarily funds that don't go untapped, but I think, you know, looking at how do we show that we have coalesced a collaboration of people often is the best way to draw attention for a resource allocation.
Wonderful. I'm not seeing other questions pop up in the chat. So I do want to remind everyone, please, there is a survey at the end of this presentation that asks if you would like to be involved in a learning community around this, and also ask questions about how useful this webinar was to you. So please do answer those questions. Again, we're just getting so many comments, Dr. Dyke, about how wonderful this presentation was. I'm seeing a comment that says this was very informative. I can relate to this topic as I grew up as one of these children. When I was growing up, these resources weren't available in my culture then. I believe as being raised by a single parent, if this information was out, family households in our community would have had a more positive environment. Yeah. Another comment that we have, great webinar. This is a wonderful reminder for those of us who work directly with the adults in family first households to not forget about the children and their needs. And then somebody says, grade for the first Lunch and Learn presentation is an A+. So we'll take it. Okay, I'm not seeing others. So with this, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, Dr. Dyke, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay, and you as well. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.